Shirley here with Jupiter point of Talis. And descendant is 1 degree Sagittarius, midheaven is 10 degrees Mercury, conjoining with the moon in Mercury sign in Virgo, and Jupiter 11 degrees squaring moon in Mercury sign, with Mercury separating from conjunction with the Sun and trying to Lilith in Libra. So this episode, I'm going to begin with a story, and I'm going to address Beta Persei Uranus, wealth in spirit and in matter, but also Lilith here in Spica. So I'm going to call on Spica and then Algedi for us. And while it may unnerve some people with the spirit of the times, it is also um, it is a perspective of astrology that is important to understand. Uranus sits in the 5th lunar mansion. And the 5th lunar mansion is a union of spirit and matter and the balancing of the two. And this is going to be a tale of trees. So I heard this story from a person who learned about forestry. And the story goes like this. It's about 2 trees. One of the trees was living in the shade of the other tree. So it was growing as a little, it's not as tall. And the way that the story was told in forestry is that one tree is basically supported by the other tree growing in the shade. And they have this cohabitance. When one tree provides for the other tree is growing in the shade. This is a very beautiful story when you look at form, at the visible spectrum of light. And let's talk about another story. Another story I heard from Richard Feynman about trees. And you know I'm a Feynman fan for a reason. And Feynman talks about trees and us thinking that trees are growing from the ground up because this is what we see. But when we look into photosynthesis, trees are actually growing upside down because they are growing from the light of the sun that nourishes the soils and the seeds in the soil, and that chemical, okay, he never said the word alchemical, of course, that chemical process between them grows the roots, which later grows the tree. And so trees are growing from the sun, they're basically growing, but up, down, okay, you have a seed, but it's up, the light of the sun comes from up, then it grows down. And then you see, okay, with the leaves, and everything that goes up catches the light of the sun again to go and grow again. And so this story by a physicist from another point of view, actually told the world from another point of view by Richard Feynman, which is classic recommendation to watch, leads me to looking at trees from the perspective of 5th lunar mansion. And 5th lunar mansion is Venus ruled, but it trines the last decan of Capricorn, which was agriculture, that stands the test of time. And one thing we can think about is a forest, or the evergreen forest. I want us to think about pictures of evergreen forests that we know of that grow in the mountains. And I want you to think about the trees. No trees living in the shade of another tree. There are some fungi. That's the most you'll see of it. But let's go back to those trees that do live supposedly in the shade of other trees. What we see, the form, is one facet. When we talk about the parts that we don't see, we don't understand the root system necessarily. We don't necessarily see who is providing for who. Because when it comes to trees, they provide for each other. Very likely they do. Okay? They provide and they share nutrients, and it's not one growing like, I'm sorry, a tumor on for the other tree. That would be fungi. And without understanding that complete part of the tale of trees, you would come to look at one tree and then another tree that is growing underneath that tree, and you think, oh, one is underneath the other. But when it comes to, for the more invisible part, is what you don't see is the actual ecosystem, is that those trees, one tree, their tallness is simply for this tallness, okay? But what they provide is not necessarily measured by their height. Now, if you don't know to assess that, you can come to think that one tree is parasite on the other tree and only provides maybe company, which is important enough. That would be a gross misunderstanding of agriculture and biodiversity. Because in the place where, if it's not a mountain, in the place where we try to grow trees, we actually had another story of trees. In Palestinian land, they're very known by their olive oil. And indeed, I haven't tasted olive oil from here from Gaza, but I did go to taste some local olive oil by Druze community, which is as ancient. It is excellent olive oil. You take that olive oil in a bottle, costs 50 shekels. It's a bottle like a mineral water bottle. Okay, it's not even a glass bottle. Okay, you transfer it to glass later. It doesn't matter. That's the oil you want. That's the actual. It's the oil that looks like it's fake. That's the real oil. Okay, it's because they're putting it in those bottles. Don't mind the bottle. That's the actual oil. And you get it from the people that come from these villages. So that's a tip for you. The more unrefined the packaging, the more real is the oil in that case. And what the thing is, the problem is that when they grow olive oils, they grow only olive oils, olive trees. Okay, so only olive trees, no biodiversity. Now, what that means is that we had a toxic fungi in the soil in Gaza. 75 years of that. Okay, no places condensed, so not enough ships, not enough movement. Although they do pick the olives, it is an active area. But generally, we had soil so toxic that even when the enemy soldiers, which is the IDF, they complained that they lost people to this toxic fungi. Now, one thing that is very good for the fertility of the soil and preserving, okay, for the soil, because it was fungi in the soil, is biodiversity. So if you think that if you see one plant that is taller, one plant living in its shade, and you think, oh, one provides for the others, not necessarily. They are providing for each other. Without either one of them, we lose biodiversity and we lose soil fertility, and there is desertification. And there's, yes, desertification is becoming a desert. Actually, to have reforestation, we form shapes that are round and contain the water. They get half moons. They contain the water with a slope where we bring back a structure that holds the water, and then something can begin to grow that is biodiverse. We bring in biodiversity to the soil by holding the water. Actually, when I attempted that in for the garden when I grew things, I guess they thought it was untended too, but I actually tried for the tomatoes to live in the shade of the tree, and they grew so wonderfully, and I saw something beginning to grow there, but then they took everything out and put some artificial grass, and I'm like, they're planning to grow mold, they're planning to go Gaza, I'm out. So they also did human trafficking and attempts to trade me and so on and so forth. But it was evident with you could see in the choices around the soil that made that place not good for anybody that partakes in that. Even if you invest in such things, um, tend to your body, you will see that as you make your body healthier, your investments are healthier too. So So this is a story of trees that reminds us that first of all, evergreen forests don't grow in the shade of one another. Okay, um, and when we want something to be evergreen, we need to allow each tree to grow to its full length. Evergreen forests don't have trees that are not allowed to grow to their full length. Okay, for the only time that we see those things is where there's one species of tree and another species, and they nourish each other. So one species growing this tall, another growing that tall, but they nourish each other, and the type of nutrients, the quality of the nutrients, and the fact that one needs less sun, which is actually a positive trait when there is limited sunlight. So one needs less sun to grow, and they can still provide and share nutrients with that which needs a lot of sunlight, which takes a lot of drain on the energy of the tree. Because sunlight both dries from the water, but it's also essential to the photosynthesis, to the alchemical process of life within the tree. This is chemical, but it's also alchemical. Going to humanity, and we talk about the tale of trees as the biggest example we have agrarianly or agriculture wise, perhaps except for fungi. And going to the tale of trees, the tale of trees and the communities and the sovereign emphasize for the story of humanity, because these stories are told as tales of humanity. With the story of humanity, it tells us that evergreen forests do not limit the growth of the individual trees. I'm going to say it 1,000 times more. Evergreen forests do not limit the growth of the individual trees. And biodiversity, the forests where our biodiversities exist of species, that one species is good enough in sustaining through a lot of sunlight, and the other is good enough with sustaining with less sunlight. Both are providing for the ecosystem. Now let's think about the people. Do you know how many jobs do people that have no ability to do things provide? Let's say a person, okay, cannot cook for themselves. Sometimes it's not because they have any visible disability. They're very good in math. They cannot cook for themselves. Okay, that's a job. Now there are people that are great cooks. If we made our technological developments for people that have disability rather than for war, then that would be the front line. There's a lot of the Mars that we could remediate, talking about the Centaurian, that we could remediate for the need of the use of this of technology, developed technology at war. If we were managing to allocate resources to develop, and I know that because this is to my heart, because right when I was with the youngpreneurs in high school, and we were drinking this lovely Dutch chocolate at the IBM, and they were expecting the toothpasta generation, where they increased the toothpasta whole by 2, and then they increased sales by that. With me, of course, I was not given my patents to that, but with me, there was someone who had a family with disability, and they were studying okay, whether it's robotics and engineering, and they had patents, they had ideas that could actually aid disabled person. If we allocate resources to that, which is no reason we shouldn't be able to, that's the frontier. And when that's the frontier, we don't have to invent the war to develop technology that will inevitably hurt people, and by the time it reaches the disabled people, we are already at the next military campaign, so you don't even get to enjoy the fruits of the medicine. I said what I said: iron levels, blood, Mars, sex organs. It's important to invest in humanity. Okay. So, this is the tale of trees, and you understand that being in the surrounding of people who have tales of trees that are limiting the growth, or that it's important to limit the growth of something, there are very few. There's just one example that where this is true, and that is in the case of cancer. So you want to surround yourself with people that tell good tales of trees and abide by these good tales. Evergreen forest doesn't limit the growth of the trees, and when you have a biodiversity, it is the conjoining of compatible, distinct qualities that make for good nourishment. And if we have people that we think are with disability, they provide jobs that, if we provide for them the technology and the medicine, we are basically easing from the frontier of war in order to advance humanity. This is good for your trade. And this is also allowing you to be less reliant on having to beat inflation, while at the same time having the wealth to allocate for the distinct and rare cases, which should be a frontier of medicine, because those tell us a lot about what the nature of humanity and the body. And when that is done, it doesn't have to go pandemic for it to reach a solution. There are cases where, Saturn needs Neptune and that and those things, but those can also be alleviated by working with the other energies of those planets, and perhaps the tale of trees is a good episode 3 for uh, astrology and the future of humanity. So thank you for watching.